My break started at 3:07 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock since 2:45, waiting for permission to sit down. 12 hours on the postpartum floor will do that to you, make you count minutes like a patient waiting for medication. The cafeteria at Rogue Regional is nothing special. Beige walls, beige floor, beige coffee that's always going cold by the time you get around to drinking it. I was standing by the self-serve counter, holding a paper cup, when I heard her voice behind me. "Are you Elena?" I turned. She was 15, maybe 16. Dark hair pulled back too tight, thin wrists, fingers picking at the edge of her sleeve. She had my eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing? She was terrified. But she was also angry. I'd seen that combination before, in new mothers whose partners had walked out. Terror and anger, braided together so tight you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "Yes," I said. "I'm Elena." She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. I knew. The way you know the phone is about to ring before it does. The way you know a patient is about to hemorrhage before the monitor shows it. 15 years of waiting, and your body recognizes the moment before your brain catches up. "I'm your daughter." She said it flat, like she was stating a medical fact. "My name is Chloe, and I want to know why you abandoned me." Marta was sitting 2 tables over, halfway through a turkey sandwich. Her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. She'd worked with me for 6 years. She knew I didn't have kids. She knew I never talked about my family. Now she was hearing something she wasn't supposed to hear, and I could feel her trying to decide whether to stay or leave. The coffee cup was shaking in my hand. I set it down on the counter. The sound it made, that small, hollow tap, was the loudest thing in the room. "I didn't abandon you," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I never abandoned you." "Then where were you?" Chloe's voice cracked on the last word. She was trying so hard to be cold, to be composed. But she was 15. 15-year-olds can't hide anything. Not really. "I found my birth certificate. I found you. It took me 3 weeks to find you. So where were you for 15 years? Marta quietly picked up her sandwich and moved to a table on the other side of the cafeteria. I was grateful. I was also mortified. I was also, and this is the truth I didn't admit to myself until much later, relieved. Someone else had finally heard this. Someone else knew. "Chloe," I said. Her name felt strange on my tongue. Chloe. I'd said it 1,000 times in empty rooms, whispered it to envelopes that came back unopened. Saying it to her face was like touching a nerve I'd spent 15 years trying to deaden. "I can explain, but not here, not like this." "Why not? You've had 15 years to explain. Why not right now?" "Because I'm wearing scrubs with someone else's blood on the cuff. Because my break ends in 7 minutes. Because I've imagined this conversation 10,000 times, and none of those versions started in a hospital cafeteria with cold coffee and a witness. Because the story is longer than my lunch break," I said. "And because you deserve more than a hallway conversation." She stared at me. Her fingers were still picking at her sleeve. I recognized that gesture. I do the same thing when I'm trying not to cry. "You actually want to tell me?" she asked. "You're not going to pretend I have the wrong person? You're not going to walk away?" "I've been waiting for you to find me for 15 years, I said. "I'm not walking away." Something shifted in her face. The anger didn't disappear, but something else moved in behind it. Something younger. Something that had been waiting almost as long as I had. "I leave for Portland next week," she said. "Boarding school. She stopped, trying to find the right word. "My mother thinks I'm visiting a friend in Ashland. She doesn't know I came here. Neither does my grandmother. If they find out..." Gwen. She meant Gwen. My sister. the woman who had raised my daughter while I wrote letters that came back unopened. "I'm off at 7, I said. "Day after tomorrow. If you want to meet. Somewhere quiet. Not a cafeteria." She pulled out her phone. I gave her my number. She typed it in, didn't send a text message, just shoved the phone back into her pocket. "I'm not saying I believe you," she said. "I'm not saying I forgive you. I just want to know what happened. That's all I want too," I said. "For you to know." She turned and walked out of the cafeteria. Her shoulders were up around her ears, tensed, like she was expecting someone to stop her. Nobody did. I stood there for a full minute after she left. Then I picked up my cold coffee, walked to the sink, and poured it out. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were perfectly still. The kind of still that happens after an earthquake, when you're waiting for the aftershock. Before I tell you how this happened, let me know where you're listening from. And if stories about family, betrayal, and quiet strength are your kind of stories, subscribe. I've been a nurse for 10 years. I've held strangers' hands while they died. I've watched mothers hemorrhage on delivery tables. I've walked into rooms where the monitor had already flatlined and the family hadn't been told yet. I know how to stay calm when the world is falling apart. But nothing in my training prepared me for the moment my daughter walked into the cafeteria and asked me why I threw her away. I need to go back. Not to the beginning. That would take longer than either of us has. But to the moment it started. To the delivery room at this same hospital 15 years ago, when I was 19 and terrified, and my mother was holding my hand, telling me everything was going to be fine. I was 19. 19, and the baby's father was gone before I'd even missed my second period. His name was Kyle. He worked at a bike shop in Grants Pass, and when I told him I was pregnant, he said, "I can't do this," and meant it. I never saw him again. I never tried to find him. My mother, Diane, came to the first ultrasound. She held my hand in the waiting room and said, "We'll get through this. Family takes care of family." I believed her. I was 19. I still thought those words meant what they sounded like. The delivery was bad. Emergency C-section after 18 hours of labor. I lost a lot of blood. I remember the ceiling lights sliding past, the mask over my face, someone saying, "Stay with us, Elena. Stay with us." I remember the sound of a baby crying. One sharp, furious wail. And then nothing. When I woke up, my mother was sitting beside the bed. She was holding my hand. She looked tired and worried and kind, and I was too weak to see anything else. She told me the baby was fine, a girl, perfect and healthy. She said she was in the NICU for observation, just for a day or two. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my abdomen was like nothing I'd ever felt. I fell back against the pillow. Then she brought up the guardianship. Temporary, she said, just paperwork, just until I was back on my feet. She and my father would take responsibility for the baby, and Gwen would help with the day-to-day care while I recovered. I could barely sit up, she reminded me. How was I supposed to take care of a newborn? It made sense. That's the terrible thing. When you're 19 and bleeding and exhausted and your mother is holding your hand and speaking in a calm, reasonable voice, it makes sense. You sign the papers because you trust her, because you've been taught your whole life that she knows better than you do, because you can't imagine that your own mother would lie to you about something this important. I signed the papers on a Tuesday. By Friday, my daughter was living in my sister's house. I didn't know yet. I was still in the hospital, recovering from the infection that set in after the surgery. I was still believing that any day now, I'd get better, and my baby would come back, and we'd be a family. I was 19 years old. I didn't understand that my mother had been planning this since the day I told her I was pregnant. Her name was Chloe. I named her after my grandmother, the one person in my family who had ever looked at me like I was enough. She died when I was 12. I thought giving my daughter her name would be a way of bringing something good into the family line. Diane changed it. Not legally, she couldn't do that, but she told everyone the baby's name was Chloe Gwen. Gwen's name, tacked on like a brand, like a claim. I found out 3 months later, when I was finally strong enough to show up at my parents' house and demand to see my daughter. Gwen answered the door. She was holding a baby on her hip. My baby. And she looked at me with this expression, not guilty, not ashamed, annoyed. Like I was a delivery that had shown up at the wrong address. I asked her what she was doing with my daughter. She told me Chloe had been living with her since the week after the birth. She said the baby knew her now, reached for her when she was frightened, slept in a crib beside her bed. I pushed past her into the house. A diaper bag sat beside the couch. Bottles were drying near the kitchen sink. On the counter was an envelope addressed to Chloe at my parents' house, the first letter I'd written after leaving the hospital. It was still sealed. Across the front, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "Return to sender, not at this address." I was holding the letter when my mother walked in. She told me to sit down. She said we needed to talk. I asked why Chloe was living with Gwen. I asked why she hadn't given Gwen the letter. Diane said she'd been protecting my daughter from instability, from uncertainty, from a 19-year-old mother with no job, no apartment, and no plan. She asked what kind of life I was going to give her. I told her I was going to give Chloe me. I was going to be her mother. She said Chloe didn't need a mother who was still a child herself. She needed stability, routine, parents who could provide. Gwen could do that. I couldn't. I reminded her that the arrangement was supposed to be temporary. Diane asked what had changed. Did I have a job? A safe apartment? Was I healthy enough to take care of a 3-month-old around the clock? I didn't have answers. I was 19. I had a high school diploma, a body still recovering from major surgery, and a mind slowly sinking into what I would later understand was postpartum depression. I couldn't argue with her logic. That was Diane's gift. She could make cruelty sound like common sense. Then she softened her voice. She said it didn't have to be forever. I should go home, get stronger, build a stable life. When I was ready, we could discuss visitation. I left the letter on the counter. 3 days later, it arrived back at my studio apartment with the same words across the front. Chloe truly wasn't living at my parents' address, but Diane knew exactly where she was. She could have handed the letter to Gwen. She could have given me Gwen's address. Instead, she used a technical truth to make me disappear. I knew she was lying about letting me back into Chloe's life. When I was too weak to fight, too broke to hire a lawyer, and too young to understand how completely my family had already arranged things without me. I kept writing letters. The first one I wrote after I came home from the hospital, before I understood what my mother had planned. After that, I wrote one on every birthday and mailed it to my parents' house. Everyone came back. I kept them all. 16 letters in a shoebox under my bed. Proof that I had never stopped trying. Proof that I had never stopped loving her. The only proof I had. I got home from work that night and stood in my living room for a long time without turning on the lights. The street lamp outside the window cast a thin orange rectangle across the floor, enough to see by. Enough to see the door to the second bedroom, the one I kept closed. I opened it now. The room was clean and empty and waiting. A single bed with white sheets, hospital corners tucked tight. A nightstand with nothing on it. A lamp I'd bought at a garage sale 3 years ago. Pale gray walls, I'd painted them myself, trying not to think about who might sleep here one day. On the bed, centered on the pillow like an offering, was a shoebox. I'd bought the shoes in 2010. They were running shoes, cheap ones from a Payless that had since gone out of business. I wore them until the soles peeled away from the leather, and then I kept the box. It was exactly the right size for what I needed it to hold. 16 envelopes, different sizes, different colors. The first one was white, standard business size, the kind you use for bills. I'd written Chloe's name on the front in blue ballpoint pen, my handwriting careful and round, the way you write when you're trying to prove something. The stamp in the corner was a flag. I'd picked it on purpose. I thought it meant something. Home, country, belonging. The envelope was still sealed. Across the front, in my mother's handwriting, return to sender, not at this address. I traced the letters with my finger. Her handwriting hadn't changed. The same sharp angles, the same heavy pressure on the pen. She'd written those words knowing I would see them, knowing what they would do to me. Not at this address. Technically, that part was true. Chloe was already living with Gwen. But Diane knew where she was. She could have passed the letter along, given me an address, or made one phone call. Instead, she returned it and used those 4 words to close the only door I still knew how to knock on. I sat down on the bed and opened the shoebox all the way. The letters rustled against each other, paper on paper, a sound like dry leaves. The second letter had a birthday card inside. Chloe was turning 1. I'd drawn a giraffe on the envelope because I didn't know what she liked yet. Return to sender. The 5th letter was thicker. I'd written 5 pages, front and back, trying to explain myself to a 4-year-old on her 4th birthday. I don't know who I thought would read it to her. Gwen? Diane? They were the ones returning the letters. I was writing to them as much as to her. And I was writing to myself, trying to prove that I existed, that I hadn't just dreamed a daughter and then lost her. The 10th letter was different. My handwriting was looser, messier. I'd written it on Chloe's 9th birthday. I was 28 that year, alone in my apartment, drunk on cheap wine and sick with the knowledge that she'd now spent almost a decade without me. I barely remembered writing it. I was almost grateful it had come back unread. The 16th letter was dated 3 months ago. I'd written it at my kitchen table on her 15th birthday, completely sober, staring at the envelope for 20 minutes before I could start. 2 sentences. That was all I had left after 15 years. Not because I'd run out of love, because I'd run out of ways to say the same thing without proof that anyone was listening. I don't know if you'll ever read these, but if you do, I want you to know I never stopped wanting you, not for one single day. I closed the shoebox and put it back on the pillow. The room was quiet. The whole apartment was quiet. I'd gotten used to the quiet over the years. I'd had to, because the alternative was filling it with anger, and I couldn't afford to be angry. Anger takes energy. I needed all my energy just to keep getting out of bed. But tonight the quiet felt different. Tonight, somewhere in Medford, my daughter was probably lying awake in a motel room or a friend's house, holding her phone, looking at the number I'd given her. Tonight, the quiet was full of possibility. I need to tell you about my family. Not the version I believed when I was 19, but the version I understand now, at 34, after years of distance and therapy and the kind of clarity that only comes when you stop hoping for an apology. My mother, Diane, is not a monster. That's the hardest part to explain. She's not cruel in the way you imagine cruelty. No screaming, no hitting, no obvious evil. She's a woman who believes, with absolute certainty, that she knows what's best for everyone in her orbit. And if you disagree with her, she doesn't argue with you. She waits. She waits until you're weak or tired or scared, and then she does what she was going to do anyway. When I was 7, I brought home a stray cat, a mangy gray thing with one ear and a crooked tail. I named him Smokey, and I loved him with the ferocious, unreasonable love of a lonely child. Diane said no. I begged. She said we'd discuss it in the morning. In the morning, the cat was gone. She'd driven the cat to a shelter at 5 a.m. She told me he'd run away. That was my mother. She never said no to my face. She just waited until I was asleep and then did what she wanted. My father, Frank, is easier to describe because he's barely present. He worked 60 hours a week at a lumber mill outside Grants Pass. When he was home, he was tired. When Diane made decisions, he nodded. I don't think he agreed with her. I don't think he disagreed. I don't think he thought about it at all. He was a supporting actor in his own life, and he was fine with that. And then there was Gwen. Gwen was 8 years older than me. She was the good daughter, the one who got straight A's, who never talked back, who married the right man and bought the right house and did everything Diane expected. Except for one thing. She couldn't get pregnant. She had already lost 3 pregnancies by then. A hysterectomy would come years later, when she was 32. But even before that, something in her had begun to change. She started looking at me differently. Not with jealousy, exactly. More like I was holding something she wanted and didn't deserve. When I got pregnant at 18, Gwen stopped speaking to me for 2 months. I thought she was angry because I'd been irresponsible. That was part of it. But the bigger part, the part I didn't understand until much later, was that she was already calculating, already seeing the opportunity. Because Diane had raised her to see opportunities, not people. The day I signed the papers, I was running a fever of 102. My C-section incision was infected. I could barely lift my arms. A social worker came to my hospital room with a clipboard, a pen, and a stack of forms. Everything was explained to me as a temporary family arrangement. The papers would let my parents make medical decisions for Chloe while I recovered. Diane said Gwen would help with the daily care because she had more room and experience. No one told me that Gwen was about to become Chloe's permanent home. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I had $340 in a checking account my parents had opened for me when I was 16. I signed. My mother folded the papers neatly and put them in her purse. She told me to rest. She said she'd take care of everything. She did. She took care of my daughter right into Gwen's house, into a nursery that had been prepared before I was even discharged, into a life that didn't include me. The infection kept me in the hospital for 11 days. By the time I came home, Chloe had been living with Gwen for a week. My mother drove me to my studio apartment, carried groceries upstairs, and changed my bandages. By every visible measure, she was a devoted mother. She told me Chloe was doing well, eating every 3 hours, sleeping beside Gwen's bed. She said Gwen was a natural. Whenever I asked to see Chloe, Diane told me to wait until I was stronger. Whenever I asked when she was coming home, Diane said I wasn't ready yet. A while. That phrase became the walls of my prison. A while stretched into weeks, then months. What I didn't understand was that Gwen was already applying for longer-term guardianship. Diane handled the paperwork and every conversation with the family. She brought me another page to sign and described it as an extension of the same temporary arrangement. I believed her. It wasn't until I went to legal aid that someone obtained the complete file and explained what had happened. My signature had been treated as consent for Gwen to remain Chloe's guardian. I hadn't surrendered my parental rights, but there was no automatic date when Chloe would be returned to me. If I wanted to change the arrangement, I would have to challenge it, and Gwen and Diane intended to fight me. By then, Chloe had spent most of her short life with Gwen. Every additional month made the situation harder to reverse. I didn't give up immediately. I got a full-time job, I moved to a better apartment in Medford, a small 2-bedroom with space for a crib. I went back to legal aid more than once. I asked about visitation, about ending the guardianship, about anything that would put me back in my daughter's life. But every path required time, money, and a fight against the same family that controlled my access to Chloe. Gwen said removing her would hurt the baby. Diane described every attempt I made as proof that I was unstable. I couldn't afford the kind of legal battle they were prepared to give me. I started nursing school instead. If I couldn't get my daughter back, I could at least become someone who would have been worth coming back to. That logic was flawed, I know that now, but it kept me alive. I stopped pursuing the legal fight when Chloe was 3. Not because I stopped wanting her, because I was broke, exhausted, and losing a little more of myself every time another door closed. I still tried to see her when I could, at funerals, weddings, and the few family events where I wasn't explicitly told to stay away. I searched the room for her. Diane always positioned herself between us. Gwen always turned away. Chloe never knew who I was. Eventually, I stopped going. It hurt less to be absent than to stand in the same room as my daughter and be invisible. And through all of it, I wrote the letters. 16 letters, 15 birthdays. The first one wasn't for a birthday. It was just from a mother who didn't yet understand that she'd lost her child. Every envelope came back. The morning after Chloe walked into the cafeteria, I was assigned to room 312. New mother, first baby, emergency C-section. Her name was Priya. She was 22, terrified, sitting up in bed with her baby in her arms and tears streaming down her face. She kept saying she couldn't do it. Her own mother was already offering to take the baby for the first few weeks, and Priya didn't know how to say no. I sat beside her bed and told her something I wasn't supposed to tell patients. She was stronger than she knew, and if someone tried to take that baby from her, even someone who said they loved her, she should fight. Because once they took it, it was almost impossible to get it back. She asked if that had happened to me. I told her I wasn't talking about me. I checked her vitals and walked out of the room. That night, I called Chloe. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? It's Elena. I'm off tomorrow. There's a park in Ashland, Lithia Park. Do you know it? I can find it. There's a bench near the duck pond, under the big oak tree. 10 o'clock? Silence. I could hear her breathing. 10 o'clock, she said. More silence. Then, I read about you online. You're a nurse. You work with babies. Yes. That's, I don't know, weird? I think the word is ironic. Was that a laugh? Almost. The smallest exhale, the ghost of a sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. I'll see you then, she said, and hung up. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, staring at the closed door of the 2nd bedroom. Tomorrow, I would see my daughter for the 2nd time in 15 years. Tomorrow, I would try to explain the impossible. Tonight, I would try to sleep. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about Gwen. We hadn't spoken in 12 years. The last time was at a funeral, our father's brother, a man I barely knew. She'd brought Chloe. I wasn't allowed to approach her. Diane had positioned herself between us like a bodyguard, and when I tried to catch Chloe's eye, Gwen had turned away, shielding her daughter with her body, as if I were a threat, instead of her sister. I'd left the funeral early. I'd driven to the coast, parked at a rest stop overlooking the Pacific, and screamed into the wind until my voice gave out. Then I'd driven home and gone to work the next day like nothing had happened. That was the pattern. Grief, suppression, work. Repeat. But Chloe had found me now. Chloe had looked me in the eye and asked why I'd abandoned her. And I was going to answer. I called Diane at 7 in the morning. She answered on the 1st ring. She always does. She already knew Chloe had found me. Gwen had called her the night before, after Chloe came home and told her everything. Diane didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what I wanted. You can show her the letters, she said, but if you do, you should tell her the rest. What rest? That you stopped. When she was 3, you stopped going to lawyers. You stopped filing papers. You built a life without her. The words landed because they were true. Not all of the truth, but enough of it to hurt. I never stopped writing. No, you wrote 1 letter a year and called it fighting. I gripped the phone harder. If you care about her, Diane said, still calm, you won't give her half a story just because it makes you look better. I won't lie to her. Then tell her everything. She hung up before I could answer. I called Gwen next. She admitted Diane had told her I'd signed the papers voluntarily and wanted the family to raise Chloe. At first, she said, she believed her. But when I reminded her about the day I'd come to the house demanding my daughter back, she stopped trying to defend herself. She admitted she'd known then. Maybe not every detail of the paperwork, but enough. She knew I hadn't intended to disappear. She'd told herself I was frightened and confused, that Diane understood the situation better than either of us, that moving Chloe again would only hurt her. By the time Chloe called her mom and reached for her when she was scared, Gwen no longer wanted to question the version of the story that allowed her to keep my daughter. Did you ever ask me? I said. Even once? Silence. Chloe needed stability. That wasn't my question. She didn't answer it. Instead, she said Diane had called her the night before, right after Chloe came home, and told her everything. Gwen had admitted Chloe found me. That was all she gave her. No address, nothing about where we were meeting. But Diane was already in Medford. She'd found my address on her own. Gwen didn't know how. She's been calling me every few hours, Gwen said, demanding to know where Chloe is. I haven't told her, but she's not going to stop. She asked me not to tear apart the only family Chloe remembered. I told her Chloe had found me, and I was going to answer whatever she asked. She asked me to tell Chloe she loved her. I told her to tell Chloe herself. By the time we hung up, it was after 8. The meeting was less than 2 hours away. That morning, it rained. Not a hard rain, a soft Oregon drizzle, the kind that hangs in the air like mist and soaks into your clothes without you noticing. I arrived at Lithia Park 20 minutes early. I'd brought an umbrella, a thermos of tea, and the shoebox, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to keep it dry. The bench under the oak tree was wet. I wiped it off with a paper towel and sat down. The duck pond was gray and still. A few ducks huddled near the far bank, waiting out the weather. I poured myself a cup of tea and watched the steam rise into the damp air. I thought about all the times I'd imagined this moment. In my fantasies, it was always sunny. Chloe was always younger, 5, maybe 6, an age when she'd still be small enough to hold. I'd imagined her running toward me, calling me mommy, throwing her arms around my neck. I'd imagined Diane apologizing, Gwen stepping aside, my family somehow stitching itself back together. None of that was going to happen. Chloe was 15. She'd spent her whole life believing I didn't want her. Gwen was her mother in every way that counted. Diane was never going to apologize. And my family was never going to be whole. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point wasn't to fix everything. Maybe the point was just to tell the truth, finally, after 15 years of silence. I heard footsteps on the wet path. I looked up. Chloe was walking toward me. She was wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled up against the rain. Her hands were shoved deep in her pockets. She looked younger than she had in the cafeteria, smaller, more uncertain. When she saw me, she stopped about 10 feet away. I'm here, she said. I see that. I gestured toward the bench. Sit. I brought tea. She sat down on the far end of the bench, as far from me as she could get without falling off. I handed her the thermos cup. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, cold despite the hoodie. Thanks, she said. She didn't drink. She just held the cup, staring out at the pond. I reached down and picked up the shoebox. The plastic bag crinkled as I unwrapped it. Chloe glanced over, curious, despite herself. What's that? I set the box on the bench between us. Proof, I said, that I never stopped wanting you. Not for one single day. She looked at the box, at the envelopes inside, visible through the gap where the lid didn't quite fit, at the return to sender stamps she could probably see from where she sat. Those are letters. I wrote one every year on your birthday. I mailed them to my parents' house because it was the only family address I had. Your grandmother knew where you were. She could have passed them to Gwen or told me where to send them. Instead, every single one came back. She used the fact that you didn't live at her address to make sure none of them ever reached you. Chloe's hands were trembling. She set the teacup down on the bench. Then came the question I'd been dreading, the one I'd asked myself 1,000 times. Why didn't I just come find her? Show up at her school, fight harder. I told her I did fight, not as hard as I should have, not as hard as I would now, but I fought. Lawyers, social workers, showing up at the house, where Diane threatened to call the police. I was 20 years old, with no money, no family support, no lawyer. And every professional told me the same thing. She's been with your sister for years. She's thriving. The courts don't like to disrupt that. I paused. The rain was getting harder. I opened the umbrella and held it over both of us. I stopped fighting when you were 3. Not because I didn't want you, because I was broke and exhausted, and every time I tried, I lost a little more of myself. I couldn't keep losing myself and survive. So I stopped. And I've been trying to forgive myself for that ever since. Chloe didn't say anything. She reached out and picked up the first letter, the one with the flag stamp. She turned it over in her hands. Can I read them? They're yours. They've always been yours. She opened the envelope. She read the first letter in silence. I sat beside her on the bench, holding the umbrella, watching the rain make circles on the surface of the duck pond. I didn't watch her face. I didn't want to see her reaction until she was ready to show it to me. This was her moment, not mine. She deserved privacy, even if we were sitting 2 feet apart. The first letter was short. I remembered writing it, sitting on the floor of my studio apartment, my incisions still healing, my breasts leaking milk for a baby who wasn't there. I'd written it in pencil because I couldn't find a pen. I'd cried while writing it, and the tears had smeared the words in places. My dear Chloe, I don't know when you'll read this. I hope it's soon. But if you don't, if she hides it or throws it away, I'll write another one, and another one, until you know the truth. The truth is that I love you. The truth is that I didn't give you up because I didn't want you. I let them take care of you because I was sick and scared, and everyone told me it was only temporary. But I know I love you. I know I want you back. I know I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove that to you. Your mother, Elena. She finished the letter and folded it carefully, the way you fold something precious. She didn't look at me. She looked at the box, at the 15 other envelopes, waiting. I told her there were 16 of them. She could read them all. But she didn't have to do it here, in the rain. She could take them. They were hers. They'd always been hers. She didn't answer right away. She was still holding the first letter, her fingers tight on the paper. Then she told me what they'd said. Diane, Gwen, that I'd moved to California and started a new family, that I had other kids and didn't want her anymore. I told her none of that was true. I never moved. I never had other children. I never stopped wanting her. She looked at me then. Her eyes were red. Her face was wet, rain or tears, I couldn't tell. She said the letters proved I had written to her. They didn't prove how long I would have kept fighting if Diane hadn't returned them. Then she went through the timeline. I'd stopped fighting when she was 3. For 12 years, I'd known where she was, and I'd let her stay there. I didn't know how to keep fighting without losing what little stability I had left, I said. That isn't the same as not wanting you. But I know it may not feel different from where you were standing. She said she didn't know what to believe. I told her I understood. No, you don't, her voice broke. You got to know you loved me. I got 15 years of being told you didn't. There was nothing I could say to that. She picked up the shoebox and held it against her chest. These are mine now. You don't get to decide what I read anymore. None of you do. I nodded. She stood. For 1 second, I thought she might say something else. She didn't. Then she turned and walked away, the shoebox clutched to her chest. She never looked back. I watched her until she disappeared around the bend in the path. Then I sat alone, under the umbrella, and listened to the rain hit the empty space beside me. She didn't call that night. I told myself it was fine. She needed time. I cleaned the apartment twice, checked my phone until the battery died, and told myself it was fine again. By the next afternoon, the mantra wasn't working anymore. I went to work. I did my rounds. I checked vitals, changed dressings, coached a first-time mother through her 3rd day of breastfeeding. I smiled at the right moments and said the right things. And inside, I was falling apart. Marta caught me in the break room, staring at my phone. She'll call, Marta said. She'd never asked me directly about the girl in the cafeteria, but she'd figured it out. Nurses figure things out. It's part of the job. You don't know that. I know you. And I know that girl looked like she wanted answers, not revenge. People who want answers usually call. I put my phone away and went back to work. Before I continue, tell me this. If you were Chloe, would you hear Diane out or cut her off after reading the letters? Leave your answer in the comments and turn on notifications, because the next part is where Diane tried to take control again. The following day, while I was home, Marta called me from the hospital. She said a woman matching Diane's description had been asking about me at the front desk. She'd told the receptionist she was my mother and needed to find me urgently. Marta hadn't given her anything, but Diane was still in Medford. She was still looking for Chloe. After we hung up, I checked the lock and pulled the curtains halfway closed. I'd spent 15 years avoiding this confrontation. Now, it was coming to my front door, and I wasn't going to hide. I spent the evening watching the window. Around 9, I saw a car pull up across the street, a gray sedan I hadn't seen in years, but recognized immediately. My mother's car. She didn't get out. She just sat there, watching the building, watching my windows. I told myself she didn't know for sure that Chloe was coming here. I told myself she was just waiting for something, anything to confirm. At 9:47, my phone lit up. Chloe's message. I read them all. Every one. Can I come over? I looked at the gray sedan across the street. Diana's outside my building, I typed. She's watching the entrance. If you come here, she'll see you. The reply came almost immediately. Send me the address anyway. I'm coming. You don't have to prove anything to her. I'm not coming for her. I sent the address. My hands were shaking so badly I had to type it twice. She arrived at 10:15. I saw her through the window, standing on the sidewalk with the shoebox in her arms. Before she looked up at my building, she glanced at the gray sedan across the street. I opened the door before she knocked. "She's still out there," I said. "I saw her." "You can still leave." Chloe tightened her grip on the shoebox. "I'm not leaving." She stepped inside and looked around. I tried to see the apartment through her eyes. The secondhand couch, the stack of nursing journals on the coffee table, the small kitchen with its single window. It wasn't much. It had never been much. But it was mine. She asked to see the second bedroom, the one I'd kept empty for 12 years. I led her down the hallway and opened the door. The bed with its white sheets, the empty nightstand, the pale gray walls. She walked to the bed and sat down on the edge of the mattress. She didn't say anything for a long time. "I read every letter," she said. I waited. "Some of them made me angry at them. Some of them made me angry at you." "That's fair. You kept saying you were coming back for me." "I believed I was." "But you didn't." "No." The word hurt more in that room than it had in the park. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this," she said. "You don't have to decide tonight." Chloe stayed in the second bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with the shoebox in her lap. I went to the kitchen and pretended to make tea. Neither of us mentioned the car again. At 10:38, I looked through the window. The gray sedan was still there, but the driver's seat was empty. "Chloe," I called down the hallway. "I think she's coming up." A moment passed. "I know," Chloe said. "I'm staying." The knock came at 10:40. Not a knock exactly. 3 sharp raps, the kind of knock that expects to be answered. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair was grayer. Her mouth was set in the same tight line it had always been when she was preparing to win an argument. She wasn't wearing the expression of a woman who had come to apologize. "It's Diane," I said. Chloe came out of the bedroom, still holding the shoebox. She looked frightened, but not surprised. "You don't have to talk to her." "Yes, I do." She walked to the door and opened it. Diane's eyes went first to Chloe, then past her to me, standing in the hallway. She didn't acknowledge me beyond that one glance. She told Chloe she'd been looking for her, that they needed to go. Chloe said she wasn't going anywhere yet. Diane looked at me then. She told Chloe, "Not here, not with me." Then she turned back to Chloe and told her to ask me when I'd stopped. She said I'd shown her the letters, but I hadn't told her I'd stopped fighting when she was 3. "I told her," I said. Diane asked if I'd told her I signed the papers. Temporary papers. "You signed them?" "Yes." Diane turned to Chloe. She said I'd agreed they should take care of her. Then when it got hard, I'd built a life somewhere else. Those letters didn't change that. Chloe looked at me. She asked if it was true. There it was. The version of the story that made me innocent was still within reach. I could say I had been sick. I could say I had been 19. I could say Diane had manipulated every decision until none of them felt like mine. All of that was true. It still wasn't all of the truth. "I signed temporary guardianship because I was sick and scared," I said. "I tried to get you back. And when you were 3, I stopped the legal fight." Diane's mouth tightened, almost satisfied. "I ran out of money," I continued. "I ran out of people willing to help me. And I was afraid that if I kept losing, there would be nothing left of me. So I stopped. I have hated myself for that ever since." Chloe's face didn't change. "I never stopped loving you. But love didn't make me brave enough forever. That's the part I can't prove away with letters." Diane folded her arms. She said I should tell Chloe the truth, that I'd agreed she was better off with them. "No," I said. "I agreed that I couldn't win." Diane said it was the same difference. "No, it isn't." I looked at Chloe. You can leave with her. You can go back to Gwen. You can never call me again. I won't tell you what to do, and I won't make you responsible for making me feel forgiven. But I will not hold on to you with a lie. Not even if the truth means I lose you again. Nobody spoke. For 15 years, everyone in Chloe's life had claimed to know what was best for her. Diane had decided what she could read. Gwen had decided which questions were too dangerous to ask. I had spent years imagining the answer I wanted from her. This was the first time any of us had left the choice where it belonged. Chloe looked down at the shoebox in her arms. Then she looked at Diane. You sent every one of these back. I was protecting you. You told me she never tried. Because a letter once a year isn't raising a child. No, Chloe said, but hiding them isn't raising one either. Diane stepped toward her. She said she was her grandmother. She'd been there for every birthday, every Christmas, every time she was sick. You were there because you made sure no one else could be. Diane stopped. You don't get to decide what I read anymore, Chloe said. You don't get to decide who I talk to. And you don't get to use the truth only when it helps you. Diane tried to speak, but Chloe didn't let her. She told her she was leaving for Portland soon. She didn't want to see her before she left. She didn't know when she'd want to see her again. That was her decision. For a long moment, Diane didn't move. I had never seen my mother without the next instruction ready. Then her face hardened. She looked at me. This is what you wanted. No, I said. I wanted her to choose. Diane turned and walked down the stairs. Her footsteps were even and unhurried. Diane never hurried. Even in defeat, she kept her pace. Chloe closed the door and locked it. Her hands were shaking. I didn't reach for her. I didn't tell her she'd done the right thing. I had just promised not to turn her choice into something she owed me. We stood in the hallway for a long time, not speaking. Then she exhaled, a long, unsteady breath. Chloe stayed for another hour. We didn't talk about Diane anymore. There was nothing left to say. She told me about Portland, the school she'd been accepted into, the roommate she'd been assigned. I told her about my first year of nursing school, how terrified I'd been, how I'd almost quit twice. Before she left, she said she didn't know what happened next, didn't know how often she'd call, didn't know if she'd ever call me mom, but she knew I hadn't abandoned her, and that changed everything. She said she'd call. Then she walked out the door. I drove her to the bus station on a Thursday morning. The Greyhound Depot in Medford is nothing special. A squat building on the south side of town, a handful of plastic chairs, a vending machine that eats dollars. Chloe stood on the platform with her duffel bag and her backpack, and the shoebox tucked under her arm. She hadn't let go of it. Chloe told me Portland was only 5 hours, not another country. There were buses back, trains, phones. She shifted her weight and said I didn't have to wait. The bus might be late. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. She said she and Gwen had talked the night before, for hours. Gwen cried. She cried. Gwen wanted to make things right, but didn't know how. Chloe told her she wasn't going to stop talking to her. Gwen was still her mom, but she needed Gwen to stop pretending everything was normal. I said that sounded fair. She said Gwen wanted to talk to me eventually, when she was ready. I nodded. I wasn't sure I was ready either, but I'd waited 15 years. I could wait a little longer. The bus pulled into the station, brakes hissing. The driver got out and started loading luggage. Chloe picked up her duffel bag, then put it down again. I don't know how to do this, she said. Say goodbye. I've known you less than a week. It shouldn't be this hard. I told her it wasn't goodbye, just a very long pause, with texting. She smiled. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. This time, it wasn't awkward. This time, she knew where to put her arms, and so did I. She smelled like shampoo, and laundry detergent, and something else. Something I couldn't name but recognized anyway. Newborns have a smell too, right after birth, before they've been bathed. This was different, but it hit the same place in my brain. The primitive part. The part that knows your own child by scent before you know them by sight. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me the truth." Then she climbed onto the bus, and the door closed, and she was gone. The first month was hard. She sent short updates about school, nothing personal. I told myself to be patient. Then she called, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Her roommate, my patients, the weather in Portland versus Medford. At the end, she said it was probably always going to be a little weird. I said probably. She said she'd call again. By the third month, the letter came. It was in a pale blue envelope, the kind you buy at a drugstore, with my name and address written in careful teenage handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photograph was of Chloe. She was standing in front of a brick building, her new school, wearing a green sweater and a cautious smile. She looked happy. She looked like she was going to be okay. The letter was short. School was good. Portland was good. She was making friends. She'd told her roommate about finding me in a hospital cafeteria. She was still figuring out what to call me, but she wanted to send the photograph so I wouldn't have to wait 15 years for a letter from her. She said she'd call that weekend. She signed it, "Love, Chloe." I turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same careful handwriting, she'd written, "For Elena, from Chloe. Portland, 2024. That night, I called Gwen. It was the first time I dialed her number in 12 years. She told me Chloe was still angry with her, but still talking to her. I said I knew the feeling. Gwen said she didn't know if she could forgive Diane. Diane had used her, used both of us. Then she admitted she should have called me. She'd told herself Chloe already saw her as her mother, that asking questions would only hurt her. But the truth was simpler and uglier. She'd wanted to keep Chloe, more than she'd wanted to face what she was doing to me. She asked if I forgave Diane. I said no, but I was trying to stop needing Diane to admit she was wrong. Gwen said she didn't know how to stop waiting for that. I said neither did I, but maybe we could figure it out. Together, she said, barely a whisper. Someday. Not yet. Not yet, I agreed. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was the beginning of one. That night, I went into the second bedroom. I stripped the white sheets off the bed, the same sheets I'd been washing and replacing for 12 years, and put on blue ones. The photograph went on the nightstand, Chloe in front of her school, wearing a cautious smile. From the bottom drawer of my dresser, I took out the baby hat, the tiny knitted cap I'd bought at 18, the one thing I'd kept when everything else was taken. I'd hidden it for years, like a wound. Now I placed it on the pillow. I didn't know if Chloe would come for winter break. She hadn't asked. Maybe she wouldn't. But the room was ready anyway. I turned off the light and closed the door. Not all the way, just enough to leave a crack of light spilling through. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who may need to hear it. And if you'd like another story like this, the next one is waiting in the description. Thank you for listening.